My name is Maris Lawson, 34 years old. The coffee mug warmed my palms as I stood on the front porch, watching fat snowflakes drift down through the bare branches of the oak trees. Barnaby slept at my feet, his graying muzzle twitching with dreams, one ear pressed against the weathered boards. It was 9 inches deep that morning, and the silence of Oakhaven in winter was absolute, the kind of quiet that made you believe you could finally breathe. For the first time in years, the house behind me didn't feel like a hiding place so much as a home. I let myself imagine, just for a heartbeat, that I might actually be safe here. Then the engine shattered everything. Two black SUVs and a massive U-Haul truck roared up the narrow lane, their tires spitting slush and gravel. They stopped hard at my wrought iron gate, engines still running, exhaust clouding the frozen air. The sudden violence of it against the stillness made my heart lurch into my throat. Barnaby's eyes snapped open, and he let out a low, uncertain whine. I was already moving before the first door opened, my mug abandoned on the porch rail, hot coffee bleeding into fresh snow. Dad Declan stepped out of the lead SUV, adjusting his wool coat like he was arriving at a country club instead of ambushing his estranged daughter. That conqueror's smile. The same expression he'd worn when he convinced me to co-sign his business loan 6 years ago, the loan I was still paying off while he called it a family investment. Then Felix jumped down from the truck's cab, already barking orders at 3 men in the back. Careful with those server racks. Don't scratch the casings. He didn't even look at me. Didn't acknowledge my existence as he directed them to start unloading equipment right there on the curb, blocking the entire street like they owned it. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Barnaby had pushed himself upright, pressing against my legs, a low growl building in his chest. Declan's smile widened, smooth as ever. "Maris, sweetheart, we're home." Home. The word hit me like a fist. 2 years. 2 years of 80-hour weeks at the architectural conservation firm, nosebleeds from exhaustion, living on ramen and black coffee. 2 years of saving every cent of that $300,000 bonus so I could buy this place, Blackwood Manor, and register it under the Oakhaven Heritage Trust to keep it anonymous, to keep them from finding me. 2 years of teaching myself that I didn't owe my family my life just because we shared a last name. I'd been so careful. I'd changed my phone number. I'd kept my address off every database. I'd used a P.O. box 4 towns over for my mail. I'd built my escape like I restored buildings, methodically, obsessively, checking every weak seam twice. But I'd made one mistake, one stupid, arrogant mistake. 3 months ago, I'd posted a close-up photo of the Manor's rare rose window on an anonymous architecture forum. Just the window. No location tags, no identifying information. I wanted validation from strangers who loved old glass as much as I did, not attention from the people who'd broken me. The Oakhaven Historical Society had seen it, recognized it, and reshared it publicly on Facebook with the full address, gushing about the restoration of this local treasure. And my mother had Google alerts set up for my name, my old addresses, architectural terms I'd used in college papers, even the make of my car. She'd found me within hours. "How did you know I was here?" I managed, gripping the gate's iron bars until the cold bit into my fingers. Declan pointed casually toward the tree line across the street. "I parked right over there for 14 hours yesterday. Watched you walk the dog at 7:30. Saw your Volvo in the drive. Saw you leave for the grocery store and come back alone." He tilted his head, studying me like I was a specimen pinned to a board. "I know you're all alone in this big house, Maris. That's no way to live." The calculation in his voice made my skin crawl. This wasn't a surprise visit. This was reconnaissance. This was tactical. They hadn't stumbled onto my life. They'd tracked it, measured it, and now they were here to occupy it. "You need to leave," I said, forcing steel into my voice I didn't quite feel. "This is private property. You're not welcome here." Felix finally looked at me then, his expression somewhere between pity and contempt. "Maris, don't be dramatic. We're family." He jerked his chin toward the server racks being stacked on my curb. "And I've got a business to run." He gestured like this was all inevitable, like my choices had never mattered. Declan pulled a folded document from his coat pocket, waving it like a flag of truce. "Felix is renting your basement. Very reasonable terms, $1 a month for 5 years. You signed it last month, remember?" The world tilted. I never signed anything. Your signature's right there, sweetheart. I didn't open the gate. I didn't move. Every instinct I'd spent 2 years rebuilding screamed at me that this was a trap, that opening that gate even an inch would be the end of everything. With my family, access was ownership. If I let them in, they would never leave. Declan's smile faded, just a little. He pulled out his phone. 20 minutes later, a locksmith's van pulled up. A middle-aged man in coveralls stepped out, toolbox in hand, and Declan intercepted him before he reached the gate. I watched through the bars as my father transformed, shoulders slumping, voice dropping to a concerned, paternal murmur. He showed the locksmith his ID, pointed at the last name we shared. "I'm her father," Declan said, loud enough for me to hear. "I live here. My daughter's having a mental health crisis. She's locked herself inside and won't let anyone in. We're worried sick about her." Weaponized concern. He knew exactly how to sound like the good guy. He'd been rehearsing this role my entire life. The locksmith glanced at me, then at Declan's kind, worried face. At Felix standing nearby, looking appropriately concerned, arms folded like this, hurt him too. "I understand, sir," the locksmith said quietly. He approached the gate, drill in hand. "Miss, I'm going to need you to step back." "Don't you dare," I shouted. "This is my property. He doesn't live here. He's lying." But the drill was already screaming, metal on metal, and the sound triggered something primal in Barnaby. The old dog started barking, deep, terrified barks that tore at his throat. He'd come from a shelter, found wandering a highway with cigarette burns on his back. Loud machinery still sent him spiraling into panic. His whole body shook against my leg. Felix's patience snapped. While the locksmith worked the front gate, my brother strode along the fence line to where the decorative iron dipped lower, half hidden behind overgrown forsythia bushes. He grabbed the top bar, hauled himself up and over with a grunt, and dropped into my yard. Barnaby lunged, trying to protect me, but his arthritic hips trembled with the effort. He hesitated for a split second, fear warring with loyalty. It was all the time Felix needed. His boot came up fast and brutal, catching the old dog square in the hip. Barnaby yelped a sound I'd never heard him make, high and agonized, and scrambled away from Felix's reaching hands. "Barnaby, no!" I screamed. But Felix had already reached the gate's interior latch. He twisted it, and the gate swung wide. Barnaby, terrified and hurting, bolted straight through the opening and out onto the road. The busy, icy road where cars came flying around the blind curve at 40 miles an hour. I didn't think. I ran. Behind me, I heard the SUV engines rev, heard the truck's hydraulic lift whining, heard Felix laughing as he waved the convoy through. By the time I reached Barnaby, shaking in a snowbank, eyes wild with fear, my family's vehicles were already rolling through my gate and up my drive. The occupation had begun. I stumbled back through the gate 15 minutes later, Barnaby trembling in my arms. He was too heavy for me to carry far, but I couldn't put him down, couldn't risk him running again. His hip joint clicked with each breath, and I felt the wetness of his tears soaking into my coat. Declan blocked my front door, that lease agreement now held up like a shield. "I'm glad you're back, Maris. Let's talk about this reasonably." He gestured toward the open door behind him, where I could hear heavy equipment scraping across my floors. "Felix is just setting up his operation in the basement. Very quiet, very professional. You won't even know we're here." I pushed past him, Barnaby still clutched to my chest. The oak door, my beautiful restored oak door, stood wide open, letting in the cold. Snow was already melting on the original hardwood floors, seeping into centuries-old grain I'd painstakingly refinished. "Get out," I said, "all of you. Get out of my house." Declan's expression shifted to something almost paternal, the performance tightening. "Maris, I know you're upset, but look at this." He smoothed the lease document against the doorframe. "This is a legal agreement. Felix rents the basement for $1 per month, 5-year term. Your signature, your witness, everything properly notarized." I finally lowered Barnaby to the floor, my arms burning. The old dog immediately limped to the corner and collapsed, whimpering. I looked at the lease. The signature looked like mine. The notary stamp was crisp and official. The date was from 6 weeks ago, a Tuesday, when I'd been at a conservation conference in Boston. "This is forged," I said flatly. "I was in Boston that day. I never signed this." "That's not what the document says," Declan replied softly. "I don't care what it says. It's fake, and you know it. Felix emerged from the basement door, wiping dust from his hands onto his jeans. He was holding a voltage meter. "What are you doing down there?" I demanded. "Just checking the load capacity," Felix said, his voice dismissive. "Old houses have terrible wiring. I need to make sure the circuits can handle the rigs." Rigs. The word slithered into my gut and sat there like ice. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't a hobby. It was industrial. It was permanent. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Oak Haven Police?" the dispatcher answered. "I need an officer at Blackwood Manor immediately. I have intruders who broke into my home and assaulted my dog. They're refusing to leave." Declan didn't even flinch. He just folded the lease back into his pocket and smiled. My emergency was part of his script. The wait for the police felt like hours, though it was barely 30 minutes before Sheriff Brody's cruiser crunched up the gravel drive. He was a tall man in his 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades refereeing small-town disputes. I met him at the door, still holding Barnaby's collar to keep him from trying to follow me outside in his panic. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff. These people broke into my home." "Now hold on." Brody raised a hand, his voice calm and measured. He looked past me at Declan, who had positioned himself in the foyer like he owned the place. "Sir, are you a resident here?" Declan produced the lease with a flourish. "My son Felix rents the basement. This is a legal tenancy agreement signed by the property owner, my daughter, Maris Lawson." Brody took the document, studied it carefully, looked at the signature, the notary seal, the terms. "Miss Lawson, is this your signature?" "No, it's forged. I've never rented anything to anyone. This is my home, and they have no legal right to be here." The sheriff's expression shifted, not unsympathetic, but resigned. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but this appears to be a civil matter. Your brother has a lease agreement that appears valid on its face. I'm not a handwriting expert, and I'm not a judge. If this signature is fraudulent, you'll need to prove that in civil court and go through the formal eviction process." "Eviction?" My voice cracked. "Sheriff, they kicked my dog. They broke in here with bolt cutters." "Did anyone witness the alleged assault on the animal?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I'd been out on the road when Felix kicked Barnaby. The locksmith had been focused on the gate. It was Felix's word against mine. I felt the ground shifting under me. This wasn't about justice. This was about procedure, technicalities, the difference between civil and criminal law. Declan smiled at the sheriff, slipping seamlessly into his favorite role. "Officer, I think my daughter just needs some time to adjust to the new arrangement. Family can be complicated." I looked at Barnaby, limping and whimpering in the corner, at Felix, grinning from the basement doorway, at my father, playing the reasonable patriarch, and I realized the law was being weaponized to protect the people hurting me. I'd grown up with their lies, but now they had paperwork. "Fine," I said quietly. "Sheriff, thank you for your time." Brody tipped his hat, clearly relieved to escape the domestic minefield. "You folks work this out, and please, keep it civil." As Brody turned to leave, I pulled out my phone again. My contacts list still had them all. Mom, Dad, Felix. I scrolled past those and found the number Sterling Vane had given me when he'd helped me set up the Oak Haven Heritage Trust. I put Sterling on speakerphone so Declan could hear every word. "My lawyer's on the line," I said. Sterling's voice filled the foyer, precise and cutting. "Mr. Lawson," he said, tone cordial but edged with steel. "I'm sure you're aware that Maris Lawson is not the legal owner of Blackwood Manor. The property is held in trust by the Oak Haven Heritage Trust, a registered nonprofit entity. Maris is the trustee, not the owner." Declan froze, which means that lease agreement, the one with Maris's signature, is invalid regardless of its authenticity, Sterling continued. "She cannot rent property she doesn't personally own. Any rental agreement would need to be executed by the trust itself, with proper board approval and documentation." I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, anger, and finally calculation. "Furthermore," Sterling added, "if that signature is forged, as Maris claims, then you've used fraudulent documents to gain access to trust property. That's not a civil matter, Mr. Lawson. That's criminal trespass on a nonprofit entity, a felony in this state." Felix's grin vanished. "Dad, what's he talking about?" Declan held up a hand, silencing him. "This is a family misunderstanding," he started, defaulting to the line that had gotten him out of so much trouble before. "I'm not confused," I said softly. "Sheriff Brody?" The sheriff had paused on the porch. He turned back, his expression hardening as he processed the lawyer's words. Trespassing on a trust was a different beast entirely. Mr. Lawson, Brody said, stepping back inside, shoulders squaring. If you cannot prove you have an agreement with the trust, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises until this is verified by a court. Declan's mask slipped. For just a moment, I saw the rage underneath. You're making a mistake, Maris, he said quietly. Family is supposed to help each other. Tell your lawyer that, I replied. The heavy clouds made the day feel older than it was as they loaded back into their vehicles. I watched them through the open doorway, shivering in the draft. They would be heading to the motel 6 towns over, the only place that's still rented to people with credit scores like theirs. Felix paused at the threshold, giving me one last look. Enjoy the darkness, little sister. I didn't understand what he meant until I closed the door and locked it. Silence returned to the house, but something was wrong. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. The thermostat display in the hallway was blank. I ran to the basement. The main breaker panel was open. Felix hadn't just checked the capacity. He had severed the main feed wires to the furnace and the kitchen circuit, neat cuts like surgical incisions. He'd sabotaged the heating system before the sheriff even walked in the door. I wrapped myself in blankets and sat on the floor next to Barnaby, both of us shivering. The temperature outside was dropping fast, and inside, the cold was seeping into everything, including my resolve. I deleted Mom and Dad from my emergency contacts and saved Sterling Vane to my favorites. The battle had just begun. The house felt like a tomb. I woke on the second day wrapped in 3 blankets on the living room sofa, my breath clouding in the frigid air. Barnaby was pressed against my legs, shivering despite the old quilt I'd tucked around him. The Victorian radiators stood silent and cold, the elaborate ironwork now just decorative coffins for a heating system Felix had murdered. My phone lay on the coffee table, its low battery warning blinking like a tiny, insistent threat. I'd spent most of the night trying not to think about how quickly a person could freeze in a drafty old house with no heat and no backup plan. I called 4 electricians before the sun was fully up. 3 didn't answer. The 4th listened to my description of the damage and said he couldn't come until after New Year's, a week away. Everyone was booked, or gone, or unwilling to drive out to Oak Haven in the snow for an emergency call at a property that already sounded like a legal nightmare. When I hung up, the silence in the house was so complete it felt like a weight pressing on my chest. No refrigerator hum, no furnace rumble, just the occasional pop of wood contracting in the cold and Barnaby's uneven breaths. So I did the only thing I could. I documented everything. I took photos of the electrical panel, wires hanging like severed arteries from the main feed, close-ups of Barnaby's hip, the bruising now dark purple beneath his fur, his eyes squeezed shut against the pain whenever he tried to move, screenshots of the property deed showing the Oak Haven Heritage Trust as the legal owner, the forged lease agreement, photographed from every angle, in case anyone later tried to claim the ink looked different or the stamp had changed. I uploaded each file to a secure cloud drive, naming them carefully, as if precision could protect me. I was halfway through renaming a folder when my phone rang. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but fear won. I answered. Miss Lawson, a woman's voice, professional and already irritated. This is Patricia Newell from Oak Haven Electric. I'm calling about the account transfer request we received this morning. My fingers froze above the keyboard. I didn't request any transfer. Our records show a request submitted at 8:47 a.m. to transfer the account for Blackwood Manor from your name to a Felix Lawson. The caller provided your social security number for verification. Ice flooded my veins, and this time it had nothing to do with the temperature. That wasn't me. Someone's committing identity fraud. There was a pause, the sound of typing. I see. Can you verify your social security number now? I did. My voice oddly detached as I recited numbers I'd written on financial aid forms and job applications, never imagining they'd be used like this. Patricia's typing accelerated. All right, Miss Lawson, I'm flagging this as fraudulent and reversing the transfer. You'll want to file a police report immediately. Whoever called us this morning had access to your personal information. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Felix didn't have my social security number. I'd never shared it with him, but Mom did. Mom had co-signed my student loans. Mom had my SSN memorized, written in her precise handwriting in the family records she kept in a locked file cabinet, like a shrine to our failures and debts. She'd just handed it to Felix to manufacture proof of residency, to build his fraudulent claim to my home. The betrayal wasn't loud. It arrived as a low, sick twist in my stomach. The quiet understanding that my mother had chosen a narrative where I was the villain so thoroughly, she was now willing to help dismantle my legal identity to prove it. I called Sterling. He picked up on the second ring. Maris, I've been expecting your call. I think Felix just tried to steal my utilities, I said, and my voice shook harder than I wanted it to. Tell me everything, he replied. I walked him through the sabotage, the dead furnace, Patricia from Oak Haven Electric, the fraudulent account transfer. I heard his tone shift from professional concern to something razor sharp. The utility fraud gives us ammunition, he said. I want you to file a police report immediately for identity theft. Then we'll file a complaint with the FTC. This isn't just about your house anymore. Felix just committed a federal crime. Will it be enough? The question slipped out before I could stop it. It's a start, he paused. But Maris, I need you to understand something. Your family is fighting dirty because they're desperate. Felix was evicted from his last place 6 months ago. He owes over $8,000 in back rent. Your parents' credit is destroyed. They're out of options, out of money, and they see your house as their last chance. I closed my eyes, picturing their SUVs idling at my gate, the way they'd moved like they were entitled to every inch of my life. So what do? You become a fortress, he said. Every move they make, you counter. Every lie they tell, you document. And most importantly, we make them radioactive. They wanted to drag you into the shadows. Instead, we're going to drag them into the light. His words settled over me like a blueprint. Fortress, counter, light. For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt something that wasn't just fear. It wasn't hope yet, but it was close enough to stand up on. After we hung up, I made the calls. First to the Oak Haven Police Department, filing a formal identity theft report. The officer on the line sounded bored until I mentioned the trust and the fraudulent lease. Then his tone shifted and he asked more questions, promised a case number. Then to the Federal Trade Commission, filling out an online complaint, typing each detail with numb fingers while my breath fogged in front of the laptop screen. Each form I submitted, each confirmation email that arrived, felt like laying another brick in the wall between me and them. I was heating soup on a small camp stove balanced on the kitchen counter, the only way to cook without power, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Maris, heads up. Saw your brother and dad at Clarkson's Hardware this afternoon. They were buying bolt cutters and asking about gate locks. Looked intense. You okay? The message was from an old college friend who still lived in town, someone I hadn't seen in years, but who still remembered enough to worry. My hand tightened around the phone. Bolt cutters. They were planning another breach. The first time they'd hidden behind a locksmith in a performance about my mental health. The next time, they wouldn't bother with the act. I forwarded the text to Sterling. His reply came fast. Keep the documentation. Do not engage alone. And tighten your physical security. So I walked through the dark, freezing house to check every lock, every window. Barnaby limped after me, whining softly, sensing my fear. His nails clicked against the wood floor, a small, fragile sound in the cavernous rooms. It's okay, boy, I whispered, running my hand over his graying head. We're going to be okay. But I wasn't sure I believed it. Outside, the wind howled through the bare trees. Snow began to fall again, thick and heavy, and my family was buying bolt cutters. The next morning, the Oak Haven Zoning Board met via video conference at 10 a.m. I sat in my freezing living room, laptop balanced on my knees, wrapped in my thickest coat, watching the gallery of faces populate the screen. Members in sweaters and glasses, the board chair, gray hair pulled back tight, and in one square, Sterling in a suit despite working from home. Agenda Item 7, the chair announced. Emergency preservation complaint regarding Blackwood Manor, filed by counsel for the Oak Haven Heritage Trust. Sterling unmuted himself. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. His voice, calm and precise, resonated through my cold living room. We've received credible intelligence that a party, one Felix Lawson, intends to operate a commercial cryptocurrency mining facility from the basement of Blackwood Manor, a Class A historic property in a residential preservation district. This operation would involve industrial electrical demands, heat generation, and 24-hour mechanical noise, all of which violate Section 12.3 of the town's Historic Preservation Code. One of the board members leaned forward on my screen. Has Mr. Lawson applied for commercial permits? No, sir, Sterling said. He attempted to enter the property using fraudulent lease documentation and has made no effort to comply with any commercial zoning requirements. Madam Chair's expression hardened, the kind of bureaucratic displeasure that could ruin people more efficiently than a fist ever could. Does Mr. Lawson wish to address this complaint? Silence. Felix and Declan weren't on the call. They had no idea this was happening. Very well, she said. The board will issue an emergency cease and desist order, effective immediately. Any attempt by Mr. Lawson to operate a commercial enterprise from Blackwood Manor will result in daily fines of $1,000 and potential criminal charges for zoning violations. Mr. Vane, please forward this order to the Oak Haven Police Department for enforcement. Of course, Madam Chair, Sterling replied. The meeting continued, but I'd stopped listening. The fortress wall had just grown higher. They could still come after me, still lie about me, still try to break gates and doors. But now, every move they made would be pushing against a legal structure they didn't control. By evening, Felix knew. I found out when my phone began buzzing, with screenshots from another unknown number. A mutual acquaintance, apparently, who followed his girlfriend on social media. Tiffany had been busy. She was broadcasting on her Instagram story, shaky videos from the motel parking lot, mascara slightly smeared, voice breaking in all the right places. Felix, the town just blacklisted me. My sister destroyed everything. Felix, we can't stay at the motel anymore. My card got declined. We're out of money. Felix, this is your fault. You had to go psycho with the lawyers. I watched the clips more times than I care to admit. Not because I doubted what I was seeing, but because some small, damaged part of me still expected to hear my name spoken with even a hint of regret instead of accusation. I screenshotted every message, every video, every caption, and sent them to Sterling. Then I did something I'd never done before. I went on offense. There was a local blogger in Oak Haven, a retired journalist named Linda, who ran a community news site. She covered everything from town meetings to local business disputes and had a reputation for being thorough and fair, two qualities my family hated. I sent her an email. My name is Maris Lawson, and I'm the trustee of the Oak Haven Heritage Trust, which owns Blackwood Manor. I wanted to make you aware of a situation that may be of interest to your readers. I attached the zoning board decision, Felix's eviction records from his previous rental, public record, easily searchable, and the police report I'd filed for identity theft. I laid out the facts. Attempted seizure of a historic property using forged documents and fraudulent utility transfers. No embellishment, no melodrama, just a clear record of what had been done. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Linda replied within 2 hours. She wanted to speak on the record, to verify documents, to confirm dates and names. For once, I had answers ready. While we scheduled a call for the next morning, the sky outside darkened, and the house grew even colder. I layered on another sweater and checked my phone battery again. 20%. That night, as I sat bundled in blankets with Barnaby curled against my side, I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Just one, moving slowly, headlights off. The familiar knot of dread tightened under my ribs. I crept to the window and peered through the heavy curtains. Declan's SUV, idling at the end of the driveway, watching the house like a predator, testing the fence. He didn't get out. He didn't honk. He just sat there, engine running, exhaust ghosting into the cold air. 10 minutes later, he drove away. They were reconnoitering again, measuring my responses, gauging how scared I was. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't used for anything but garden layouts and soil reports. Chase, the archaeologist from the Historical Society who'd been helping with the manor's garden restoration for the last year. Quiet, competent, kind. Not entangled in my family's mess, at least not yet. Hey, he answered, voice calm despite the late hour. Everything okay? Not really, I said. I need a favor. It might sound strange. Try me. I explained the situation. Not all of it, but enough. The family, the fake lease, the sabotage, the bolt cutters at Clarkson's, the SUV idling like a threat outside my gate. I think they're going to try to break in again. Soon, I finished. And I need to make sure this gate holds. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said without hesitation. He arrived with his truck bed full of tools and materials, breath steaming in the icy air. Together, under the weak beam of his work lights, we reinforced the gate discreetly, adding internal braces that wouldn't be visible from the street, installing a heavy-duty lock that couldn't be easily cut. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would advertise our preparations. Just quiet strength layered into metal and hinges. Maris, he said as we worked, his voice low, careful. You know you don't have to face this alone, right? I looked at him, really looked at him, at the steady hands, and the way he dropped everything to help me without asking for anything in return, at the absence of calculation in his eyes. Thank you, I said quietly. I mean it. If you need anything... Actually, I interrupted, an idea crystallizing, sharp and terrifying and necessary. There is something. New Year's Eve. Are you free? As the words left my mouth, I glanced back at the dark road beyond the gate. Snow was falling again, soft and relentless, covering the tracks of Declan's SUV. Somewhere out there, my family was planning their next move, convinced they were the hunters, and I was still the cornered prey. They had no idea I was done running. By the next morning, Linda's article was live. I read it on my laptop with numb fingers, curled into myself on the living room sofa, while Barnaby dozed against my leg. The headline was blunt and surgical: a historic property dispute, accusations of forged documents, zoning violations, identity theft. She'd been fair, frustratingly, painfully fair. She'd reached out to the trust, to the town, even to Declan for comment. He'd declined, which only made the facts she laid out look heavier, more deliberate. Felix's eviction history, the bogus lease, the emergency cease and desist order. It was all there, steady and undeniable. By the time I scrolled to the comments, there were already dozens. People were angry, but not at me this time. Long-time donors to the Historical Society. Neighbors who remembered my parents bragging about my fancy conservation job at barbecues. Strangers who cared more about preservation codes than my family drama, but still understood what it meant to try to steal a trust property with forged paperwork. The sympathy my mother had milked on Facebook began evaporating in real time. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Another unknown number. You're going to regret this. We're family. You don't destroy family. No name, no need. I forwarded the message to Sterling and to Sheriff Brody, then archived it with the rest of the evidence. I thought about responding, something sharp and final, but I didn't. Anything I said would only feed the narrative that I was unstable, emotional, out of control. Let the text sit there, ugly and obvious, in the folder labeled proof. If they wanted to fight in public, fine. I would too, but I'd use facts. The next 48 hours blurred into a strange kind of war room. I made quiet calls to people who mattered in Oak Haven, but rarely raised their voices. The mayor's office, the president of the Historical Society, a couple of longtime donors who could freeze a fundraising campaign with a single raised eyebrow. I'm hosting a small New Year's Eve gathering, I told each of them. Nothing dramatic, just a few friends, a thank you for everything this year. I'd be honored if you could come. Every single one said yes. I gave them specific instructions. Use the back lane and the garden gate. Park by the carriage house. If you see lights off at the front, that's intentional. Just come around the back. I'll have someone there to let you in. No one asked why. Maybe they already knew. Maybe Linda's article had been enough. Maybe small towns just understood when something ugly was growing under the surface and chose their side with quiet, decisive steps. Inside the house, Chase helped me turn Blackwood Manor into a stage. We set up the great room with warm lamps, candles tucked safely into glass hurricanes, and rented a string quartet from the city that was thrilled to play in a historic home on New Year's Eve. A local caterer we'd used for Historical Society events delivered small bites and champagne, more elegant than anything I'd grown up around. Chase adjusted furniture and hung temporary drapes to shield the rear hallway from drafts, moving with the practiced care of someone who respected old structures. It looks like a scene from one of those period dramas you make me watch, he said, stepping back to admire the room. You like those shows, I reminded him. I like how invested you get in the ones where the heroine finally kicks her terrible relatives out of the estate, he corrected. I didn't argue. On the morning of New Year's Eve, Tiffany posted one last video. It slid into my feed via another forwarded message from a friend who followed her for the drama. She stood outside the motel, wind whipping her hair, mascara smudged, for maximum effect. Behind her, Felix loaded suitcases into the truck. I could hear his raised voice even over the hotel's automatic doors. This is it, you guys, she announced to her followers, voice trembling. We're officially homeless. Felix's evil sister has destroyed us. But we're not giving up. Tonight we're going to reclaim what's rightfully ours. Justice is going to be served. There it was, the threat dressed up as destiny. I watched the video 3 times, pausing on Felix's expression in the background. No guilt, no doubt, just simmering fury and entitlement. Then I sent the clip to Sterling and to Brody. "Sheriff," I said when he picked up, "I have reason to believe my family will attempt to break into Blackwood Manor tonight. I have video of them saying they're coming to reclaim the property, plus a witness who saw them buying bolt cutters. I'm formally requesting police presence." There was a long pause. I could picture him at his desk, weighing town politics against preservation law, my history against theirs. "Miss Lawson," he said finally, "I'll be attending your New Year's gathering as a guest, but I'll have my badge and my radio with me. If anything happens, we'll handle it." "Thank you," I said. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I looked tired and older than 34, but there was something else there now, too. A kind of hard, quiet determination I didn't recognize from the girl who used to smooth things over at holiday dinners so no one would fight. The trap was set. New Year's Eve arrived, wrapped in brittle cold, the kind of sharp, crystalline air that made sound travel farther. I'd finally managed to get the heating system repaired the day before. The electrician had charged almost $4,000 to fix Felix's damage and upgrade the panel, but for the first time in days, the house didn't feel like a refrigerator. I walked through the rooms with the thermostats turned up just a little higher than normal, making sure every guest would be comfortable, even if I wasn't. We kept the heavy velvet curtains in the front rooms drawn tight. No light leaked onto the snow-dusted lawn. From the road, Blackwood Manor looked abandoned. Dark, quiet, unwelcoming. Exactly the way I wanted it to look. Guests began arriving mid-afternoon, slipping in through the garden gate in heavy coats and careful shoes. Chase greeted them at the back entrance, collecting coats, guiding them through the warm kitchen and into the great room. The mayor and his wife. The Historical Society president, cheeks flushed from the cold. A couple of preservation activists I knew from work, a handful of wealthy donors who had backed every restoration and project Oakhaven had ever attempted. Even Sheriff Brody, in a dark suit with his badge clipped unobtrusively at his belt. "Quite the crowd," he murmured to me when I offered him a glass of champagne. "Thank you for coming," I said. "After that zoning board meeting and Linda's article, wouldn't have missed it." His tone was mild, but his eyes were alert, scanning exits and entries, as if he'd done this 100 times before in parking lots and dive bars instead of historic parlors. The string quartet played something soft and luminous. People laughed, talked, admired the carved moldings and the restored ceiling medallions. More than once I heard some version of, "Your family really tried to do this?" in low, disbelieving voices. I smiled politely and changed the subject each time. Tonight was about more than my personal history. It was about showing Oakhaven exactly what Blackwood Manor could be when it wasn't being treated like a resource to be stripped bare. At 11:30, my nerves sharpened enough that I could no longer float between conversations. I drifted toward the front hall, heart thudding harder with each step. Chase followed, setting his half-empty glass on a side table. "You sure?" he murmured. "No," I admitted, "but I'm done letting them pick the battlefield." We eased open the edge of the thick front curtains just enough to see the driveway. The rest of the light stayed trapped inside, hiding the people filling the rooms behind us. A moment later, I heard Sheriff Brody's footsteps and felt him come to stand a short distance away, close enough to intervene, far enough not to crowd. The mayor, alerted by some communal sixth sense, wandered over with his wife, masking his curiosity as casual interest in the view. Outside, the lane was empty at first. Snow glittered faintly under the streetlights. My breath ghosted on the glass. I was just starting to wonder if they'd decided to postpone when 2 vehicles appeared at the far end of the road. One SUV I recognized instantly, and a second truck rolling just behind it. Both crawled forward with their headlights off, like they were trying not to disturb the air. "They're here," I said quietly. They parked at the tree line, same place Declan had admitted watching me from before. 3 figures got out. Declan's silhouette, broad and familiar. Felix, shoulders hunched in a way that looked more like aggression than cold. Tiffany, walking slightly behind, holding her phone up and angled toward her own face, even now. Of course she was streaming this. Felix led the way to the gate, bolt cutters glinting in his hand. Even from inside, I could hear his voice. pitched loud enough for any hypothetical cameras. "It's 11:45 on New Year's Eve," Tiffany narrated breathlessly to her followers, her words faintly audible through the glass. "We're about to reclaim justice. Felix's sister has been illegally keeping him from his property, but that ends tonight. Watch this." She turned the camera to catch him fitting the cutters around the reinforced lock that Chase and I had installed. Metal groaned under the pressure. On the second squeeze, the lock snapped with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in my teeth. Felix kicked the gate open, iron slamming against stone. He didn't hesitate. "Maris!" His voice boomed across the yard. "I know you're in there. This is my house now. You can't hide forever." He stomped up the walkway, Declan and Tiffany trailing behind. At the door, he set his shoulder and kicked once, twice. On the third strike, the restored oak frame gave way, and the door shuddered inward, banging against the wall. Cold air rushed in, curling around my ankles. Felix stormed into the entryway, bolt cutters still in his fist, triumphant words already forming on his lips. "Maris, there's nowhere to—" He stopped. The foyer was flooded with soft, golden light from the great room beyond. 30 people turned as one to look at him. The mayor, the Historical Society president, preservation donors in evening clothes, the string quartet, their bows hovering over silent strings. Champagne glasses paused midway to mouths. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The only sound was Tiffany's phone, still streaming, still broadcasting his entrance and the room of witnesses to whoever was watching her live. Felix's face went slack. He stared at the crowd, then at the bolt cutters in his hand, like he was only now understanding how this looked. "Felix Lawson," Sheriff Brody said, setting his glass on the nearest table and stepping forward. His voice was calm but carrying. "You're under arrest." Felix blinked. "What? No, you can't. I have a lease." "You have forged paperwork," Brody replied evenly. "You have a cease and desist order from the zoning board. And now you have just committed breaking and entering with burglary tools in front of 36 witnesses." He reached for his cuffs. "This is no longer a civil matter." Declan raised his hands, palms out, sliding into his favorite role like a suit coat. "Officer, please. This is just a family misunderstanding. It's New Year's. We don't need to escalate." "Mr. Lawson," Brody interrupted, "I have a warrant for your arrest as well. Forgery, conspiracies to commit fraud, identity theft. Step over here, please." I stood halfway up the grand staircase, one hand resting on the banister for balance, watching them from above. Felix's eyes found mine, wild and disbelieving. "Maris, please," he said. "We're family. You can't do this." I thought of Barnaby limping in the cold, of the severed wires, of my mother handing over my social security number without a second thought, of motel videos and Facebook posts and years of being told that loyalty meant letting them take whatever they wanted. "Mr. Lawson," I said, my voice carrying more steadily than I felt, "please direct all future communication to my attorney." Behind Felix, Tiffany seemed to finally grasp the gravity of what she was filming. The comments on her live were scrolling faster than my eyes could track, full of words like breaking and entering and caught on camera and wow, this backfired. Her face went pale. "I didn't know it was like this," she whispered. "Felix, you told me this was legal. You said—" "Tiff, shut up," he snapped. She took a step back, clutching her phone like a life raft. "We're done," she said louder this time. "I'm not going down with you." Then she turned and ran, sprinting back out through the broken door, the live stream wobbling as she fled. 2 more squad cars pulled up outside, lights finally blazing blue and red across the snow. Officers entered, efficient and quiet. They cuffed Felix first, reading him his rights, while Tiffany's abandoned live continued to broadcast from the porch. Another officer secured Declan, the forged lease, and the identity theft report, now more than just paperwork, now charges. The guests watched in stunned silence. No one clapped, no one cheered. This wasn't entertainment, it was surgery. Necessary, brutal, done under bright lights, so there could be no arguments later about what had actually happened. I followed them as far as the threshold. The night air knifed into my lungs, but I barely felt it. I watched as Felix was guided into the back of a squad car, cheeks flushed with fury and humiliation. Declan went into another, his expression strangely blank, like he'd stepped outside himself to escape accountability. The doors closed. The engine started. Tires crunched over ice and snow, carrying them away down the lane. Only when the lights disappeared did I realize my hand was shaking. Behind me, the mayor cleared his throat. Maris, he said quietly, I'm so sorry you had to go through this, but I'm glad we were here. The president of the Historical Society lifted her glass, eyes bright. To Blackwood Manor, she said, and to the woman who refused to let it be stolen. Others echoed softly, to Maris. Chase appeared at my side, his hand grazing my shoulder in a question. You okay? I looked back at the broken door, at the boot scuffs on the floor, at the bolt cutters abandoned on the rug like a shed skin. Then at the room full of people who had come when I called, who had stood and watched instead of looking away, who had lent their names and their presence to my boundary. Yes, I said, and this time, to my surprise, it was true. I think I am. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark trees, midnight rolled over Oakhaven. Fireworks bloomed faintly in the distance, flashes of color against the winter sky. Inside Blackwood Manor, the music slowly started again, quieter now, but steady. The siege was over. Spring arrived in Oakhaven like a slow exhale, soft and warm after months of clenched, frozen silence. The last patches of snow melted from the garden walls, leaving the earth dark and rich. Morning light pooled in golden ribbons across the lawns, warming the ancient stones of Blackwood Manor until the whole property seemed to breathe again. For the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, I felt like I could breathe with it. 5 months had passed since New Year's Eve, 5 long, complicated, liberating months. I sat in the garden with a cup of tea, my laptop open on a wrought iron table. I was reviewing restoration proposals for the carriage house, but half my attention drifted to the dogwood trees, blooming along the path. Their white blossoms fluttered in the breeze like soft handkerchiefs waving off winter. Barnaby lay nearby in a patch of sun, his gray muzzle rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. His hip had healed better than the vet expected. He still limped on cold mornings, but the pain had faded into something manageable. He no longer flinched at shadows or sudden noises. Sometimes I thought the house healed in tandem with him, or maybe we were just learning to inhabit peace together. Chase knelt several feet away, working near the old garden wall with a small brush and unwavering concentration. Spring excavation season was his element. He'd been thrilled to resume cataloging the property's hidden historical layers now that the chaos had finally stopped. He held up a small piece of pottery to the sun, dirt flaking from its edges. Looks like Wedgwood, he murmured. Probably late 1800s, given the pattern. Your Victorian residents had good taste. They also buried their trash in the flower beds, I reminded him. He grinned without looking up. Archaeologists call that enriching the historical record. I laughed, a soft, real sound that didn't feel foreign anymore. Over the winter, while legal affidavits and hearings piled up, Chase had become a constant presence. Not intrusive, never demanding. He showed up with coffee on the days I had to give depositions. He repaired the front door with me when the replacement hardware arrived. He babysat Barnaby during the sentencing hearing, when I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the dog alone after everything he'd endured. Somewhere in the quiet hours between court dates and restoration meetings, colleague had shifted to friend, and friend to something still unnamed but steady and warm. The brass plaque on the front gate caught the afternoon sun, the engraving sharp and unmistakable. Property of the Oakhaven Heritage Trust, by invitation only. I'd commissioned it in February, once the final paperwork was done, once the trials ended, once I knew exactly who belonged inside these gates, and who never would again. Felix had pleaded guilty. He'd accepted 18 months in minimum security, restitution payments, and probation rather than drag everything through another round of litigation he couldn't afford. Declan had tried to fight the forgery charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge had been clear, almost clinical in his reasoning. Intent, documentation, harm. Declan was serving 2 years. My mother had never been charged. She'd claimed ignorance, said she didn't know the documents were forged, said she didn't know Felix planned to commit fraud, said she'd only been trying to help her son. Prosecutors couldn't prove otherwise. But she stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped posting about me on Facebook. The silence from her was the clearest admission of guilt I would ever get. I blocked her number anyway. Some bridges weren't meant to be crossed again. Some were meant to be closed, locked, and archived like dangerous artifacts. Maris? Chase's voice pulled me back from the past. He was watching me with that careful attentiveness he'd learned, the kind that said he understood trauma didn't vanish when the threat did. You okay? Yeah. I closed my laptop. just thinking about how different things are now. He brushed soil from his hands and stood, stretching his back before crossing to the table. Good different? I looked around the garden, the tulips, the dogwood blossoms, the warm stone of the manor, the sunlight on Barnaby's fur. The air smelled like fresh grass and possibility. Very good different, I said. His hand brushed mine on the table, fingers hesitating just long enough for me to meet his eyes before intertwining with mine. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping. It didn't need to be. It felt like an answer I'd been waiting to receive in a language I'd only recently begun to learn. Out on the road beyond the gate, a car passed. Slow, curious, probably one of the new tourists following the Historical Society's spring walking tour. Blackwood Manor had become a preservation success story, a symbol of resilience rather than conflict. Visitors took photos from the path, admiring the rose window or the restored stonework. But unlike Winter, I didn't tense when I heard an engine. I didn't rush to check if someone was approaching the house. I didn't brace for a knock or a storm. The gate was locked. The alarms were set. And more importantly, my boundaries were real now, not just legal, internal. I had stopped apologizing for protecting my life, stopped calling self-preservation selfish, stopped trying to build safety by making myself small. Barnaby shifted in his sleep, one paw twitching in a dream. Chase hummed softly as he worked, some folk tune I didn't recognize but found comforting anyway. The manor stood tall behind us, its windows glinting with warm reflections of spring light. The house felt alive again, not as a fortress, but as a home. Mine, chosen and defended. Family, I realized, wasn't defined by blood. It was defined by who showed up when the sky cracked open, who respected your no without demanding explanation, who celebrated your victories without asking for a cut. I squeezed Chase's hand. He squeezed back, eyes soft and certain before he let go and returned to his excavation tools. A warm breeze drifted across the garden, carrying the scent of lilacs. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle into my bones, deep, steady, earned. For the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to hold. Peace. Not fragile, not borrowed, not conditional. Real peace. The kind you build yourself, the kind you guard without shame, the kind that comes after you survive the worst and finally choose to live instead of hide. Behind us, Blackwood Manor stood sentinel, not a place to escape to, but a place to grow from. A home, my home. And this time, the gate wasn't keeping the world out of my fear. It was protecting the happiness I was building inside.